Come, Holy Spirit, and kindle the fire that is in us. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and see through them. Take our souls and set them on fire. So we lived in St. Andrews, Scotland from 2002 to 2006. And there's a particular day that I remember. I was walking down South Street, which was one of the major streets in St. Andrews. I was heading east. And there was a man, I presume a father, who was walking rather quickly down the sidewalk. And he was walking rather quickly because he had a toddler on his shoulders. And this toddler was screaming and throwing a fit like you would never believe. And slapping the dad in the face all over. There was this mixture of feelings that rose up in me. One of them was compassion and empathy, because I thought this looked incredibly painful, but also excruciatingly embarrassing. And then there was a part of me that felt a bit of admiration that this father could do this with such restraint. This would not have happened in my household. But then there were some other feelings. Feelings of disgust and disdain. Disgust that this child was behaving in such a shameful manner. More disgust because this father was allowing it and allowing himself to be treated this way. I remember thinking, does he not have any self-respect? This feeling of disgust and disdain, I think that's where our story begins today in the gospel. The Pharisees are grumbling. And I would guess that they are expressing their disgust and their disdain over this shameful law that has gathered around Jesus. Jesus has been on his way to Jerusalem. And as he has been traveling this road to Jerusalem, crowds of people are following him. And he's instructing them about what it means to follow him. Take up your cross and follow after me. Or right before today's story, he's telling the crowds, count the cost of discipleship. Don't join me without thinking through what it's actually going to take to follow me all the way to Jerusalem. And what's so fascinating about this is that all manner of people were following him. It wasn't just the pious who had attached themselves to Jesus, but there were sinners. And by sinners, we don't just mean people who sin. We mean people who had checked out of the system. They were no longer following the law of Moses, not even trying to follow the law of Moses, not even trying to follow the tradition of the elders. They had checked out of the religious system completely. And then there were some tax collectors who were Jewish people who had been hired by the Romans to collect taxes on their behalf. And so you had scribes and Pharisees, you had pious people, and then you had these outcasts, these sinners and tax collectors. All of these people were following Jesus. And Jesus was welcoming the sinners and tax collectors, eating with them as if they were like anybody else. To the Pharisees, to the scribes, this was all very shameful. Jesus was supposedly someone who spoke for God, who acted on God's behalf, and now that he was taking the blessings of God and wasting them on people who didn't deserve it, wasting them on people who weren't even trying to do anything to follow God. So for them, it was was a shameful scene that triggered their sense of disdain and disgust. And so Jesus tells a story. Arguably the most well-known story that Jesus tells. Certainly the most developed. And it's a familiar story. And we call it the story of the prodigal son. And I don't know when that title got attached to the story, but it's a bit misleading. First of all, if you'll notice what Jesus says first when he introduces the story, he doesn't say there once was a prodigal son. He said there once was a man who had two sons. So watch the father. And then the word prodigal can be a bit misleading. I've only ever heard the word prodigal used in this story. So growing up hearing this story, I just assumed that prodigal meant somebody who's immoral and, antisocial, all that sort of thing. But if you look at prodigal in the dictionary, it doesn't mean someone who's immoral. Prodigal means extravagant. Someone who is wastefully extravagant with their property or possessions. And so when you look at what the prodigal does, the son, how he takes his inheritance, as we'll see, and wastes it, the word prodigal fits in. The word prodigal, somebody who's extravagantly wasteful, also fits another character in the story. And then there's one other piece that I think as 21st century readers of the Gospels need to keep in mind and need to know. Because it's critical to how Jesus' hearers would have originally heard his story. But in first century Palestine, as well as the larger Mediterranean world, one of the principal virtues was honor. And what you were required to do as a good citizen, as a good person, particularly if you were male, was to protect your honor. Because your family's honor depended upon you. And the honor of the village depended upon you preserving your honor. And so Jesus begins. There was a man who had two sons. And one day the younger son came to his father and said, "You know what, Dad? I'm ready to be out of here. I would like my inheritance now." Can you imagine anybody going up to one of their parents while they're still alive and asking for their inheritance? Back then it was unheard of. You would not have done this. And had a son actually done this in that setting and in that culture, the appropriate honorable response would have been for the father to beat that son within an inch of his life. That's what would have been expected. But what does the father do? Takes his inheritance, divides it in half, gives half to his younger son, half to his elder son. The next day, the younger son liquidates all of the assets and takes the money and heads off into a foreign country. And our New Revised Standard says he wasted it in dissolute living. In the Old King James, it was riotous living. And before long, the inheritance was gone. And to make matters worse, a famine hit the land, and he was hungry. And all of the friends that I imagine he had gathered around him to help him spend his inheritance were nowhere to be found. And so this young Jewish boy is in a Gentile land, and what he is reduced to is slopping pigs. Not the most kosher of jobs for a Jewish boy. And he wasn't being fed, really, to the point that he was so hungry that he this anymore. And besides the fact, my father's servants eat better than this. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to tell him I'm sorry. I'm not even worthy to be called his son anymore. And maybe he'll treat me like one of his hired hands. So he travels home. But he doesn't make it to the front door. Because his father apparently has been watching and waiting for him. And when his father sees him coming off in the distance, he runs to him. Middle Eastern men do not run in public. Middle Eastern men do not wait for their wayward sons to come home. Yet this one did. And when he arrived, the son can't even get his whole speech out. And he's hugging him, he's celebrating. He turns to the servants and says, go get the signet ring, put it on his finger, go get the best robe and put it on him, put shoes on his feet, and go kill the fatted calf, because my son who was dead is now alive. And he invites the whole household and village around to celebrate this. Now, we are familiar with this story, and we are familiar with the passion and love of the Father. But Jesus' original hearers would have found everything that you have heard so far utterly shameful and disgusting. A father should not act in such a dishonorable way. I mean, as I was thinking about it, that man who was walking down hurriedly South Street in St. Andrews while his face was being slapped, do you think he went home? And when he got home, he was so joyous and excited that he decided to throw a party for his son. That he invited the neighbors and said, guess what happened? My son was beating my face all the way down South Street, but I made it home. We're home, and let's celebrate. I mean, we laugh, but if you came to that party, I might guess, might experience a bit of disgust. That this is really shameful behavior that should not be celebrated. And so at this point in the story that Jesus is telling, everybody is on board. The scribes, the Pharisees, the tax collectors, the sinners, they all know that Jesus has painted this shameful display of human behavior. And now they're waiting for the hero to come in and save the day. The first two characters have been prodigals, extravagantly wasting property and love and mercy and things like that. So the third character comes in, and he's going to be the hero. Because every story with three characters, the third one is the hero, right? And he is, by all appearances, he's the hero. He's the most honorable person in the whole story. Because he's always done what's been expected of him. See, he comes in from the fields. He's been in the fields working, while his father has been, in the front yard pining after the younger son. But he's been working in the fields, and when he gets done with his work, he comes, and he is surprised to hear the sound of music and dancing. And so he calls one of the servants over and says, what's going on? Well, your younger brother's home. And your dad killed a fatted calf to celebrate. Now he's ticked. But he does the honorable thing. He doesn't barge in and shame his father in public. Instead, he waits for his father to come out, and he confronts him in private. He says, I cannot believe this. I have been with you all of these years, and I've been slaving for you all these years, and not once have you ever given me a goat so that I might have a party with my friends. And yet, this younger son of yours can't even say my brother. This younger son of yours wastes your inheritance on prostitutes, and you welcome him home open arms to throw a feast for him. Again, at this point, all of Jesus' hearers are in line. The elder son has been the honorable one. He is the hero. The question is going to be, will the father listen and repent of his shameful behavior? And then comes the twist. second character who gets the last word and transforms the whole scene. Notice what he says to his elder son. He treats him with the same compassion that he treated his younger son. Son, you have always been with me, and everything I have is yours. Which is literally true. Because at the beginning of the story, he separated his inheritance and gave half to the younger and half to the older. The father owns nothing. The father possesses nothing. Everything that I have is yours. And you've been with me. But it's right to celebrate. Because your younger brother was lost. He's now been found. He was dead and now he's alive again. So now the question is, what's going to happen? What will the elder brother do? Will he be reconciled to his father? Will he be reconciled to his younger brother? But we don't know. All we know is that our image of God has been completely transformed. We don't know what happens to the elder son, but we do know what happens to Jesus. He continues on the road to Jerusalem. And the same sort of people who were questioning his shameful behavior of welcoming sinners and tax collectors, those same sorts of people take the Son of God and crucify him, nailing him to a cross. Naked and alone. They shame him in front of the whole population. They torture him and beat him like a toddler slapping the face of his father. And how does Jesus respond? Father, forgive them. They don't know what to do. That is the God that we worship. That is the God that we follow. And he is a prodigal God. And at times, his willingness to endure embarrassment and shame is off-putting. And maybe even generates feelings of disgust and disdain for us. And we don't always know what to do with a God who is willing to go to such lengths in the name of love and mercy and compassion. But you know, if you're trying to rescue someone who is drowning, you're going to have to get wet. And if you have a world that you created that is filled with people who are overburdened by their own sense of shame and guilt, then you might have to endure some of that shame and guilt in the name of love to bring them back home. Amen.